that takes us over to lesson 6. We briefly covered part A on this one, which is God accepts Abel's offering but rejects Cain's. God judges the whole world and man invents religion. So on this one, we're going to work through the review questions 1 through 3, and then on the next section, the paradox, we're going to work through questions 1 through 3 on that as well. So do you want to take question 1 for us, Logan?
Man chose to follow Satan rather than God. They chose to do what they wanted and to go their own way. In taking this action, they became a slave to blank, blank, and blank. Comment on each of these things was a slave man.
What do we think? What do we think the first one is? They became a slave to Satan, sin, and death. Yep. Do we remember who Satan is? Who is Satan? Huh? Okay, yeah. Lucifer, remember, created being, the morning star, the I wills, wanted to become like God, was cast out of heaven.
Father of lies.
Yeah, father of lies. Sin.
That's good.
What's sin? Yeah, choosing to go your own way, right? Apart from the laws that God had set in place. And death. Remember what death is? Separation. Yeah. Yeah, we talked about the 3 types of death. Does everybody remember what those are? Physical.
Spiritual. Eternal.
Yep. Cool. Good. Let's see. Marissa, do you want to read question 2?
Yeah. Where in the Bible do we find the first promise of a deliverer? Genesis what?
Yeah. Genesis what? Yeah. Genesis 3:15.
Man, you guys are good.
Yeah.
Threw down some freelance questions there.
What did we inherit from Adam? Yeah, sin nature. All right, let's see. Lori, do you want to read the next question there in the paradox section? Question 1.
Just as God established physical laws to govern the universe, so there are spiritual laws to govern the relationship between God and man?
Yep, absolutely. We talked about the physical laws, one of those being gravity. If you don't respect the law of gravity, then you're going to suffer the consequences of that. Same goes with the spiritual laws that we'll learn more about as we go along. Let's see, question 2. Want to read that, Carson?
Then read the next one.
Yeah.
According to the Bible, man's sin debt can be paid in only one way. 1, hard work. 2, death. 3, good deeds. 4, sacrificial lifestyle. E, giving. F, attending church regularly. And G, obeying the commandments.
What do we think?
2.
Hard work?
Lori, let him think about it. God, just slip him the answer there.
Sacrificial lifestyle.
Good deeds, sacrificial lifestyle. Remember, what was the punishment for sin?
Yeah.
Death, right? As hard as that is for us to kind of accept, that's the truth of what God says. That's the punishment for sin. Max, you want to read 3?
Oh, sure. God created man and loves him, but God is also just and demands death for the penalty of sin.
Yep. Yeah, last time that's where we kind of ended, was talking about how God is perfectly just, at the same time is perfectly loving. So how does he deal with this new situation that man's in? And that's where we kind of pick things up, and we'll learn more about that as we move along.
You know, that last question was is actually to really get the concept of that. Garrett pointed that out, that how do we pay for our sin debt? Is that how we worded that, Garrett? How do we word that? That's the question
Yeah.
that Carson read.
How do you pay, man's sin debt can be paid in only one way. Which way is it?
So that's an important question. A lot of things pivot on that. And we've really just introduced it. But today you should gain a full understanding of the answer to that question. So we're on lesson 6. And, part of the understanding of the concepts we're dealing with here is that we kind of have a paradox. God created people. He created us. He wanted a relationship with those that he created. That's why he made them, so that they would know him. Yet God set things out in the beginning that the payment for sin is death, and they sinned. So what now? What now? Does God just wipe everybody off the face of the earth? Is he just done? And you could, in one sense, if you're thinking, you could say, "Aha, gotcha, God. You're gonna have to compromise somewhere." But God's not gonna compromise. He's gonna make a way for people to know him, to continue, a way to show mercy and grace without losing his full righteousness, justice. Does that make sense? Because he doesn't change it. Death is still the punishment for sin, and all sin must be paid for. Okay, so we'll kind of get into a little bit tonight of what God is beginning to show a solution to that problem. So I think that brings us down to part B on your outline. Well, just before that, we just said God is completely righteous and just. God is also loving. I hope you can see the tension there between those two. So back to our storyline in part B. It's called Atonement. After eating the fruit, this is pretty interesting stuff when you start digging into it. After eating the fruit, Adam and Eve did something. They were doing something to try to make themselves acceptable to God. That is kind of the essence of sort of the wrong view on religion that most people in the world have. That they were going to do something to make themselves acceptable to God. So they covered themselves with the fig leaves. And God, they still felt exposed. So why was that they still felt exposed? Now y'all are going to have to control your emotions, because Rylan is with us. We are glad that she's with us. But you're going to have to, she is a lot more entertaining than I am. So we're not even the same ballpark for cuteness. So you're going to have to use some discipline, and stay with me, okay?
Maybe you should wear one of those flashy.
Maybe I should do that. Okay. Maybe wear 4 or 5 of them. Okay. Garrett, because you're responsible for this, 1 Samuel 16:7.
All right, but the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart."
If you want to understand God, what he's like, who he is, this is critical stuff that we're about to dig into here. God looked right through their feeble attempts, and he could see their hearts. So they changed their outward appearance, but their hearts were still sinful, still rebellious against God. And he rejected their attempts at self-improvement. That's what they were trying to do. Improve themselves, make themselves acceptable to God. And he began to teach them. So we're on a journey here now. He's going to teach them that they could do nothing. They could do nothing outwardly or inwardly to remove the sin problem. You guys understand that sin it's a problem because it has separated them from God. And it's like their purpose, their reason for being, their fulfillment, it's everything is their relationship with God. But they've been separated from that. And so he wants them to be back in fellowship with him. But he's going to maintain his justice all along the way. So he didn't accept their effort, their self-effort, their fig leaf clothing. So how in the world are people going to be reconciled to God? So here's something that God is going to provide them with clothing. So they need to be clothed. God's going to provide them with clothing, and it's going to involve a death. How do I know that? What did he clothe them with? Animal skin. He did not accept the fig leaves. He clothed them with animal skins, and I just want you to catch a glimpse of. So they're not like us. They were not hardened, and especially if you think of somebody in the that lived in the rural areas, agriculture, where death is just a part of life. Animals die, and we become hardened to that. But they had never experienced that. This was brand new to them, that an animal would die. Most likely, they were there; they saw it. So reality's starting to set in. Okay, they sinned, death happened to clothe them. And they were banished from the garden. Now, things were different. They had a sin nature. They were not going to be allowed to eat from the tree of life and live forever. Now, you're going to see something so you have a lot of really spiritual stuff going on here, but there's also a lot of kind of genetic, scientific stuff going on too, because they're so close to the original creation, they are nearly genetically perfect. So we like to think of ancient man as being, and there's a lot of evidence that this is not true, is like grunting around and just learning how to make fire and live in caves and that kind of stuff. But they were probably nearly perfect intellectually and physically. And so they're going to live, if there's some other environmental factors involved in this too, we'll get into later. But so they were going to live for a long time. So they didn't drop off dead immediately, but they were not intended to die. But they were going to die eventually. And they were not going to be allowed to eat from the tree of life and live forever. So they're banished. They're banished from the garden. And the Bible says they were driven out. And sort of, God's going to, in a sense, phrase this. He's going to repeat some of Satan's own words. Like, making sure they understand. And we all can relate to this if we're in tune spiritually at all, that things didn't turn out how Satan promised. They didn't get what he promised. Okay, and we go our own way. We all can relate to that concept, I believe. Things didn't quite turn out like I thought they would here. So let's go to some verses here, Dave. Genesis 3:22-24.
And the Lord God said, the man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. So the Lord God banished him from the garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken.
So, being your own God, so he was in a sense repeating Satan's words. Being your own God is not all that it was promised to be. One thing is that in being our own God, we don't have everything we need to be our own God, right? Are you all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere, all the time? No way. So you're not prepared, in a sense, to be your own God. You're not called to be. But that is one of the temptations, one of the things that Satan used, is that you're the captain of your own destiny kind of thing. You decide. You decide. You don't have to listen to God. And they weren't equipped for that, but God was going to let them suffer the consequences if they wanted to stick with that. And now you'll notice something here, a phrasing. And if you guys notice this, I want you to look closely when we read. It's like I said, there's another time that said, let us make man in our own image. Now they're going to become like one of us. And almost saying that in a cynical kind of way. That But at the wording there, we're not going to really get into right now. Remember, we've studied in depth, there's one God. And so there's an odd wording there, but there's a reason for that odd wording, but we're not going to get into it just yet. Okay? So let us make man in our own image, that kind of way of wording things. And then yet, at the same time, we know for certain. We read, do y'all remember all those verses you read in your homework? There's one God, there's only one God, I'm the only one, there's nobody like me, that kind of thing. So those two things are still true, but we're not going to dig into it. We're not going to dig into it right now. But I hope that those things bother you when you read through it. Hope you have questions, because we should read this for the investigating. We should read this like, I want to know the whole thing. I don't want to be tricked. I don't want to overlook stuff. I want to know the real truth. That's the way we should be reading the Bible. So let's get down to Cain and Abel, and this we'll understand with Cain and Abel. I believe that you'll understand the sin thing and the payment for sin. I think you'll understand it a little more deeply as we go through this. Verses 1 and 2.
Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil.
Okay, so Cain and Abel, they are born outside of the garden. Remember, Adam and Eve are already outside the garden. They're not going back in the garden with that perfect Garden of Eden state. They have to work the land. Remember the curse? The curse is on the earth. They have to work the land. There's going to be pain in childbirth. There's going to be sickness and disease. Now that stuff is going to add up. Like, for instance, genetic defects will add up over time. There will be more viruses, more illnesses, those sorts of things that are going to add up over time. But right now, it's not very far down the line. But still, Cain and Abel are born with a sin nature. I hope that resonates with you, that we looked into that this nature of rebellion against God, doing your own thing apart from God. It's sort of this self-focus. This if I go on and explain it in more detail right now, you'll be sooner or later I'd get to the place where you go, oh, okay, I got it. That's me. Yeah, I got that. I've got that nature. You would get to that place, but we're not going to take the time fully to go there right now. So they are sinners, and they must die for their sin, right? Is that not the spiritual law? They must die for their sin. So God gave them instructions on how to come to Him. How can they know God? How can they come to God? How can they approach God? So now we're going to look at, He's going to develop this, what we call the sacrificial system. And so we're going to look ahead a little bit to some of these are some of the things that God informed them of. We don't have all the details of that right here in Genesis, but some of the principles. Let's look ahead to that just a little bit. Casey, Hebrews 9:22. Is that are you on the outline? Am I together on this outline?
Casey just read.
Yes, but
Oh, my bad. No, Taylor, you take it. Casey, don't be stingy. Don't be greedy here. Hebrews 9:22 and Micah, Leviticus 17:11. Y'all are going to learn, like with Bailey and Lori really have this down. When I'm wrong, I immediately get correction. So y'all will learn this way of doing things also.
No worries. In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness.
Okay, blood, that signifies death, right? There's no forgiveness of sin unless the sin is paid for by death. Okay. Mike?
For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar.
Okay, don't say my bad.
It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life.
Okay, so they knew this. You'll see, they knew this principle. And God loved them, and in His mercy, He's going to provide a way for them to escape judgment. And so He began to show them how to bridge the gulf that sin caused. So the separation between God and man, and God's now beginning to reveal to them, how can we bridge that gap of separation and restore broken fellowship. That's where this is going. That's the purpose of it. But it must be done in God's way, right? God, He's the one that understands and knows all this and made it. He made the rules. And so it must be done in His way if they're going to approach God. So they would build these like earthen platforms, and they would kill an animal. Their blood would run out, and that animal would be a substitute for the person. So normally the person that did the sin would have to die themselves, but they could bring their sacrifice that would be a substitute and die in their place. God was saying that he would accept the death of an animal as a substitute, and so he would put off the judgment of their sin. And then that way they could have a relationship with him if they came as instructed. Two critical things about this instruction. It is a graphic illustration of the demands of the law. Remember, they weren't used to this idea of death. This was new, animals dying. They had not experienced this. So it would be a graphic illustration to them. It would be a picture of justice fulfilled. The shed blood would cover man's sin. So the word for that is atonement. The spiritual, the religious word, whatever for that, is atonement. That it would cover, the blood would cover the sin. God would accept them as if they were righteous. The relationship would be restored between God and man. Now, we got two brothers here coming up, Cain and Abel, and they're going to come to God. So let's read this, and then I'll shed hopefully a little more light about what's going on here. Verses. This is a troublesome story. Okay, the whole story is troublesome, beginning to end. Really, it is. It's a difficult story. But here we are. It reveals some things. Okay, let's read it. Verses 2 through 5. You want to read that, Brooke?
Yeah, do you want me to reread 2? Because she read 2 earlier, so I can start at 3, but...
Yeah, go ahead and read it, yeah.
From 3?
Yeah, 2 through 5. 2 through 5.
Okay. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast.
Tell you what, a lot of people really struggle with this story. When I say story, it's a narrative. It's not told like a parable, like it's just to give an example. It's told as a narrative, like history. Like this is the way it happened. This is what happened. Now, a lot of times in the Old Testament, you'll find that a lot of times the story is just told. And really to understand that story, you must fit it within the context of the whole of Scripture, all the Bible. And so that's the case here. It's told here as history, but there are some things that we can get from it. So I'm going to tell you how Cain came to God. I have to think about it because I always get them confused. What?
Cain can't.
Cain can't.
That's how I remember.
Cain. I remember about Cain is a pain. So Cain was a farmer, and I don't blame you for thinking like this. I remember thinking. I can remember reading this story some of the first times and thinking, "What's up, God? Look, Cain grew his crops. He worked hard. We know it was hard work by the sweat of his brow. We're already told that's the way it is. And he worked hard to grow his crops. We don't know. We're not told exactly what they are. He brings, and a lot of times when people will say, "Well, he didn't bring the best." Well, it doesn't say that. It doesn't even imply that he didn't bring the best. He could have brought the very best he had and brought it to God, brought it to the altar, brought it to God as an offering to God. Here, God, here is the fruit of my labor, the work of my hands. I've worked hard for this. This is the best I have. Here you go. And God says, I don't accept your offering, Cain. People go, what kind of God is this? What kind of God is this? All right, let's look at Cain's. Let's look at Abel's offering, okay? So Abel brings a sheep, brings an animal, brings livestock, brings the sheep to God. The way they were instructed to do this is you bring the animal, you put your hand on the head of the animal, identifying with that animal. This should, if you get this concept, you will understand much of the Old Testament. This is foundational understanding. He put his hand on the head of that animal, takes his knife, cuts its throat. You say, well, you're getting kind of gruesome here, Steve. He cuts the throat. It bleeds out. It dies right there in front of him. And he, by that act, if his heart is right, he's saying to God, God, I deserve to die. Take the death of this animal in my place. And he cuts its throat. This is hard stuff. This is hard stuff. It's hard for them. It's hard. This is hard stuff. Cuts his throat. He dies out right there. And God says, I accept you. I accept you. Do you see the difference in the two offerings? What's the difference?
There's a substitute.
Why did it count as a substitute? Go ahead.
Because there was death.
There was the death. A death. He died in place of Abel. A death. So, do I have some more verses here? I can't remember on this. Okay, Hebrews 11:4.
By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous, when God spoke well of his offering. And by faith Abel still speaks, even though he is dead.
He accepted him as if he was righteous because his sin was atoned for. His sin was covered by the blood. So he came. It's not because Cain came working. He worked hard. It wasn't that Abel worked and earned that. It's because his approach was, I'm trusting God here. I'm trusting God to take care of my sin. I'm coming the way he said to come with a substitute. And so God, and it's all the way up into, all the way way into the New Testament, it commends him for coming in the way that God instructed him to come. So there's, let's go ahead to verses 5 to 7.
But on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.
You know, when I read over this is the second instance of psychology that we run into. You know, if somebody is remember we talked about this. If people are struggling in their life, and so they go see a psychologist, and the psychologist tells them, "Oh, it was your daddy that caused all this." And then here we have Cain is what? He's depressed. He's rejected. He's dejected. And what's his problem? Why is he feeling like this? It's because he wouldn't acknowledge his wrong. He refused to acknowledge that he was wrong, and it made him angry. He was the one responsible. It made him angry. Made him depressed. God tried to reason with Cain. He gave him opportunity. I want us not to, this is, it's hard to find a balance in how we read all of this, is that I'd like for you to begin growing in your understanding of who God is. What God is like, besides being all-powerful, all-knowing, everywhere, all the time, and all those things, creator, of getting to realize how God is equally loving, equally just, but he's personal. He's personal. He wants Cain, even though Cain has done wrong, he wants Cain to be in a relationship with him. But he's got to come the way God said to come. He can't come in the way that he thinks is best. He thinks hard work, doing a good job, doing all those things is going to get him. And God's saying, no, there's a punishment for sin. You need to get in line with the way that things are. He gave him opportunity that he too could be accepted if he came like Abel. There's no record of Cain replying to God. He wasn't speaking to God. He was mad. He was mad at God. And he's sulking. Verses 8 and 9.
attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where's your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?"
Have y'all ever wondered where that phrase came from? Am I my brother's keeper? Right here. This is where it came from. Oh, Cain. God still, you see, God is still offering him mercy. Do y'all pick up on this? He rebelled against God. He murdered. God is still offering him mercy. If he will just come to God the way that God said. But, you know, I don't know. I just want us to get a hold of this because I can relate so much to this story of like God's asking a question, God's calling, but I kind of picture Cain doing this. Just running away from God. And yes, I've done that. I haven't literally done that. Like, well, I did just now, but figuratively, I have done that. And God was giving him opportunity to. God knew what happened, just like he knew what Adam and Eve had, and he questioned them still. Give them opportunity. Did we read verses 9 and 10?
No,
Carson
it
did
was 10.
Okay. Where are you at, Carson? What verses do you have? Chapter Genesis 4, 9 and
4:10.
Yeah, 4, 9 and 10.
Didn't you just read 9?
Well, we're
His question. He sometimes wants you to do it again.
Oh, okay. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground."
there's going to be a price to pay, and he's going to be separated from God. Cain. So let's go on to verses 25 to 26.
Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Seth also had a son, and he named him Emmaus. At the time, the men began to call on the name of the Lord.
So Seth was born with, but remember, although this is connected to Genesis 3:15, right? That from the seed of the woman, from the line of the woman is going to come one that will be a deliverer, that will deliver from the control of Satan, sin, and death. Remember, the control of is not just like the control of Satan, Lucifer, but also the control of sin is not just acts of sin, but the control of the sin nature. So he's going to be set free. He's talking about being set free from the control of the sin nature and from death, that is separation from God. So there's one a deliverer who will do that, and he's going to come through the line of Seth. But Seth had a sin nature, but he came to God like Abel came to God. He came to God in faith with the blood sacrifice. Now there were many other children born. Like some old time scholars, like there's some historians, Josephus. There's some other like from the early New Testament days, from Jewish tradition, and so this is not in the Bible, but there's this tradition that they had. Remember, Adam and Eve lived to be like what, 900 years old. They were nearly genetically perfect. Their window of childbearing is going to be like a long period of time. So there's those guys are saying, I'm not saying that I know this to be fact, it's like something like 27 sons and 30 daughters or something like that. They had a large number of children. So, and it just says there that there were many other children. So it's time to leave Adam and Eve and Seth, and they grew to a very old age, and not only were they genetically nearly perfect, but they were probably, this is another thing, a scientific guess, but there's other theories on this, so I'm not saying that it doesn't say this specifically in the Bible, but like there was a greenhouse effect. Remember the waters above from the waters below, that there was like a vapor, that there was a protection of the world which had a more even climate throughout the world, and protection from UV rays and that kind of thing. So we don't know exactly all of the environment, but the environment is going to change dramatically on the earth to more of what we have today, and we'll probably get into that. We'll get into that a little bit today. Genesis 5, 4 and 5.
After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, and then he died.
Okay, so then the Bible's going to get into this. Where there's at this point, people are following God. There's people they all knew of Abel, they knew of Seth, and they had turned back to following God. But then, as time passed, people turned away from God, as people tend to do. And about 10 generations passed, that's about 1600 years, and the world population had increased dramatically. Do y'all have any questions about that? Okay. About how the population increased? Okay. What? So, each generation had a view.
He's sitting together.
Your wife.
What? So, each generation.
I think next week I'm definitely sitting with my
So each generation, though, had a few that believed. But in general, the direction of mankind the world became a very wicked and a very violent place. Satan is still involved here, and the people seem to be open to the occult. And we'll find this from throughout history, particularly in the Old Testament. We'll find that the people, once they turn and go away from God, they become very open to the occult, to demonic type things, where they're drawn to that type of stuff. And you see that in the world today. When a culture goes downhill, it becomes, I'm not saying that when a culture is, that everybody is following God, but there can be a culture that has similar standards of godly standards. And when a culture turns and goes away from God, like wholeheartedly, you'll start to see demonic, occult things that will begin to come in. And this is what's happening. This is what happens then. Let's read Genesis 6, 1 through 4.
When men began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. How far?
Through 4.
Okay, that was 4.
Okay, so this is a very unusual, very odd verse for us. And there's some of these things when you talk that sounds like it could be positive, but it's really a negative verse. When it says married, that's a kind of a loose sort of a translation of the Hebrew word, and it doesn't necessarily mean married in the sense of what we think of a committed relationship between a man and woman. But these were probably, there was demonic influence here, is what's going on. And we're not going to dig deeply into this, but I think there's some referrals to this in the New Testament, that either these were demon-possessed men. When it talks about the sons of God, that's a term for angels, but these are not good angels, these are fallen angels, and somehow Satan was wanting to genetically disrupt the human race, and in a sense get another race, and he remember, he wants to disrupt the coming of the deliverer, and he wants to rule. He wants to be in charge. And this is a kind of an all-out effort in his part to become involved with the human race in a way that is unlawful by God. And so these angels, these demons that were involved in this practice, either have taken on human form, we're not told exactly, either have taken on human form or just possessing men and having relations with women of the human race. Then the angels that did this, that crossed that line, they did not wait until the end of times to be thrown into the pit. They were immediately thrown into the pit. And we can read that. You can read that if you don't go there now, but if you want to go check this out, 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6, that talks about those angels that crossed the line, and God said, no more will you be allowed to go this far. Your power is going to be limited here. And so he limited the power of Satan and the power of demons in this respect. But anyway, the world, I'm trying to give you a flavor for what's going on. Mankind is wicked, violent, but still don't get the idea that there's not culture. We're told that some of that culture developed. They were making musical instruments, they're making tools out of bronze and metal. So they were an advanced civilization that's just growing like crazy, and they're making progress, and they're super intelligent, but they're also super wicked. So things are spiraling in a sense out of control, and so God gives them a deadline. When He says His days will be 120 years, that doesn't mean the lifespan. That's talking about it's 120 years until I bring judgment on the earth. He says you have 120 years and judgment's coming. That was what the 120 years is about there. And let's go to, who's next?
I am.
Garrett, would you go ahead and take those next few verses? Is Genesis 6:5 and then 11 and 12.
Yep. The Lord said, "How great The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways."
So before that, it speaks of some of Cain's descendants. And one of Cain's descendants was Lamech. And it talks about the culture that developed. There's they kind of moved away, started their own civilization, if you would. So you had these different civilizations going on. And culture was developing, music, use of tools, using metals, all those sorts of things. So we're not talking about grunting around kind of people again. But still they had rejected God and were following Satan with gusto. And if you think of some of the things that have happened in recent times that we know about, it probably doesn't even compare to what was going on then. But this is pursuit of pleasure on a new level. It's also included think of nations today: genocide, rape, anarchy. Evil consumed them. Sexual perversion consumed them. So it's been close to 2,000 years, and this downward spiral of mankind is going on. So living for self, taken to the extreme. And let's look at some verses that kind of deal with this a little bit. Is Dave Can you read all those verses from Romans, Dave?
Sure.
So this is all in chapter 1 of Romans. This is kind of describing what happens with mankind, with people.
For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in their sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen.
So, once you get a little feel of what's going on in the earth at this time, and God was grieved by what was going on, and still, he held man accountable. That, remember, there's a spiritual law, and God's going to hold them accountable. Genesis 6:7, Casey?
Do you want me doing 29 to 32?
What? Oh, did we miss that?
I just did 20 to 25.
Yeah, go ahead, 9 to 32. Go ahead. And then Taylor, you're going to be up for 6-7.
They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them.
They're running full tilt as a society, as a culture. The whole culture of the world was running full tilt away from God, and pretty soon it was going to envelop every person. And God's going to put a stop to it. Taylor, verses.
So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them.
And then Micah, verses 8 to 10 in Genesis 6.
But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And then did you want
8 to 10.
This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
I'll give you a heads up when we get into there's a chapter about Shem, Ham, and Japheth later, and you probably can trace your ancestry back to one of those guys, but that's later. So one man and his family was different. He trusted God and came to God the way God instructed. How did God instruct? How are people to come to God? What was the way God made for them to come to him? They sinned. What do they do? What? What kind of sacrifice? Death. A blood sacrifice. So when it says Noah was a righteous man, we don't go to the fact, Noah never sinned. It doesn't. That's not what it means. Remember, we looked all the way back. We looked in we talked about Abel, and it said Abel was accepted by God as righteous because he believed God and he came to God the way God instructed. That was Noah. That describes Noah and Noah's family too. So they were considered righteous because they came to God, whether they had never sinned. They came to God the way he had said, and God had accepted them, and they were in a relationship with God. And they came as he instructed. So verses 13 and 14 of Genesis 6. Did I warn y'all this is a little bit of work? Okay, so you got to use a little focus here. We're going somewhere with all this. It's always going somewhere. Okay, where are we at? Verse 13 and 14.
So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both of them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress, wood, and make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out.
Okay, so Noah is to build a boat. Now, this isn't just any boat. This is a massive wood structure. And if you look at what a cubit was, a cubit actually is from the tip of a man's finger to his elbow. And so that could vary just a little bit. But the dimensions, though, it's pretty easy to figure out the dimensions of the ark and this boat that he is to build. And it's really, if you're imagining something like those little pictures you see where they, I'm always imagining the little, where they do the, what do you call that when you do the yarn and you make the pictures? Needle.
Like the one in the room.
Yeah, needlepoint. I've never done that. You ever done that, Gary?
All the time.
Rosie Greer did it. He was a man.
Okay. As long as you do elk, yeah, grizzly bears. This is not a little ship with holes in the roof and the giraffe's head sticking out like I've seen the pictures of. This is a massive ship that the size had not been duplicated until like in the mid-1800s, and that's about the time they quit making wooden vessels. But it was at the minimum 150 yards long, football field and a half, probably a little bit longer than that.
I was trying to imagine it, I'm sorry.
Okay, good. I mean, you can imagine with your hands. And more of like a rectangle, probably 85 feet wide, 50 feet tall. And now, don't get the idea that Noah had to build this boat by himself, okay? First of all, he had 3 sons, their wives. He had relatives that were not going to stay alive until the flood came, but he had Methuselah, who was still around then, and it would be easy for him to hire other skilled workers to help. So it's not just necessarily one guy. And it probably took at least 50 to 70 years to build the boat. Do you have a picture of the ark? Would you like to pass? Oh, can other people handle that phone? I don't know if you allow that or
I
not.
don't think she can either.
That's from the Creation Museum.
Okay, so they did the Creation Museum. It's it's a pretty awesome place. We've been there years ago, before the ark was built. That one. It's probably as close of a duplicate as you could get from following the scripture. Have y'all been there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We went there a couple
Well,
years ago.
speak up.
That's pretty amazing. It's huge.
Yeah. And, with a lot of structures in the Bible, we get very, very specific, like Solomon's temple. We have, very specific detail. Even the tabernacle in the desert was very, very specific. The ark, we're not told as specifically, but we have pretty general thing, enough to get a good idea of what it would look like. And the dimensions and such are similar to huge modern ships. This would be the size of a moderate size cargo ship today. And probably levels, probably like 3 different levels, and there was a ventilation, which would be much needed, all the way around the top. So they had systems for feeding, for watering, because they're going to have some animals join them in a minute here. So probably remained, but the other cultures later built some wooden vessels almost as big as the ark. The Chinese built some very huge wooden vessels. Who else built some? I forgot the other culture that built some similarly sized wooden vessels, but not quite as big as the ark. So it's a stable. If the dimensions are for stability, not for speed. Okay, and people that know, there have been some really in-depth studies of the dimensions of the ark from ship like colleges that train in shipbuilding and that sort of thing, not just from like Christian people like the Answers in Genesis, but have come up with the conclusion that this vessel would have been able to withstand 80-foot waves, that it was built to survive. And it could rock and roll with the waves and weather tremendous storms and weather, which is going to have to do that. So it's a large, stable boat built only to preserve life, not to move through the water at speed. So there you go. Let's read. It's y'all's fault. We're past the quarter till, but we're going to stop here and just read this verse. Okay. Verses 17 to 22, chapter 6.
I'm going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you and be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him.
Okay, so we will wrap it up there, and we'll get into this in a little more detail next week, and we'll, as we look into the flood, I believe that the flood, you will find a better explanation than you've ever heard before about the geography around us, from the Grand Canyon, to Canyonlands, to the peaks of the Wasatch out here. The flood gives a better explanation for this geology than fossils. The flood tells us where fossils came from, really. And so we'll take a look at this next week. If you guys look at this, you have questions, you bring them next week. If you want to do a little research on your own, you can go to answersingenesis.org, and there's some scientists that really cover in detail. Would you guys like to share?
No.
Okay. That's as far as we'll get today. You got it, Garrett, for our questions next week?
Yeah.
And we'll